coming on the air tonight with a big deal, a moment that is making history, a moment that matters for so many people across this country. A decision from the Supreme Court that has people in some states waking up with the constitutional right to an abortion. And now dinner time on Friday night no longer have that right. We're getting into this decision by the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. The reaction from people who support and oppose abortion rights, the reaction from White House, from Capitol Hill, part of my conversation with two Democratic lawmakers who are now strategizing to think up any way to try to codify abortion right protection federally. And President Biden, he's slamming the court and saying it's now up to voters. We're also live on the ground in states where abortion just today has become illegal, essentially, or may soon be banned, with reaction from Michigan, Mississippi, Florida, and Missouri. More on what comes next. We're also live in California, which is looking to expand abortion protections, with new concerns about what this means for the economy, this court decision, and the impact on millions of Americans. We'll get into what the research shows about how some may now end up in poverty. We'll also take you to a clinic in one of the few states that allows late-term abortions to see if it'll change their practices. That's coming up in the original later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and this morning in at least 6 states, people woke up with the right to abortion access. Tonight, that right is gone. More states will follow, because right now you've got a country trying to process this new era after the Supreme Court's historic landmark decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. The decision, led by the conservative majority, ends the constitutional federal right to have an abortion. It's a right that people in this country have had for the past 49 years, and the first time ever that the court has granted a right to Americans and then taken it away. You can see the makeup of those on the decision on your screen. And this now here, this is a live look as we speak outside the Supreme Court. These crowds, these demonstrators, they have been there all day long since before 10 o'clock in the morning. You have some in tears, devastated. You have some in tears of joy, cheering after decades of organizing. Listen to just some of what we've heard in the last couple hours.
To see us going back to knitting needles and the whole thing, I'm stunned.
I am excited to raise my kids and to have grandchildren inside of a post-Roe America. Knowing other mothers out there who can't make a choice, it's pretty hard.
Human rights start at conception and end at natural death, and that is what I'm going to fight for till the day that I die.
This decision is only backed by justices appointed by Republican presidents, 3 from former President Trump, who you're going to hear about more in just a bit. The decision written by Justice Samuel Alito, an opinion that's pretty much in line with that leaked draft we learned about in May, one that was written back in February. Justice Alito writes, quote, "The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision." He says it is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to people's elected representatives. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that we are now becoming a divided country on the issue of abortion access. Look at this map, okay? You know the states in red? These are states that are already doing something about it. They have so-called trigger laws that were in place for this exact scenario. If the court did exactly what the court did today, that would basically flip a switch and move to ban abortion altogether. Some are total bans, no exceptions. Some have some exceptions for rape, incest, or the health of the mother. In 6 of those states, as we said, those bans are in effect right now. That is the lightning speed at which this has unfolded in just the past 7 hours in this country. We've got another 14 states that haven't outright banned abortion, but they have restricted abortion access significantly to viability, right? Less than the 24-week standard that Roe set. They're all candidates to go even further in their abortion bans. So that leaves 23 states, the states in blue you see on your screen, where abortion is right now still legal. Some of those states are trying to strengthen their laws, trying to boost protection, basically, bracing for more women coming in, possibly from states nearby, where abortion is going to become illegal. We should note here, too, the political backdrop to this. Most Americans, based on polling, don't support what the Supreme Court has done. Our most recent numbers here at NBC find 63% of Americans didn't think that the court should overturn Roe. Just 30% do. And in just the last couple hours, we heard from President Biden slamming the court and saying restoring this right is now up to voters.
With this decision, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court shows how extreme it is, how far removed they are from the majority of this country. My administration will use all of its appropriate lawful powers. But Congress must act. And with your vote, you can act. You can have the final word.
So here it is again, live right now outside the Supreme Court, where protesters, both for and against abortion rights, are coming out, they are showing up, they are using their voices. That's one of a ton of angles we're going to be covering over the next 90 minutes, including the political reaction and live reports from states where abortion is now illegal. But let's start here in Washington with the man who covers this court, Pete Williams. And Pete, let me start with what is happening now as we speak. Just several hours ago, we saw Arkansas, I believe, become the latest state with one of these trigger laws to formally say, yes, abortion is now banned in our state, bringing the total, I think, to 6. Where does that stand right now?
You're right, 6 and more to come. Some of these trigger laws say that the states could act immediately. Those are the ones we've seen so far. Some say they would act after 10 days, some after 30. So within a month, you'll see all the 13 trigger laws fall into line. And then the rest of those states that you had on the map earlier will probably ban abortion within the next several weeks after that.
Let me go back to this decision by Justice Alito, who says abortion is not deeply rooted, as he put it, in this nation's history and tradition. Explain what the ruling means and what else we should take away from it.
Well, the reason he said that is this. He said you can't find a right to abortion in the Constitution. So the right that it derives from, according to the Supreme Court, is partly the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Amendment that everybody knows about, but also guarantees due process. And what he says is you can only get to abortion rights through that if a right, based on an earlier Supreme Court decision that actually had to do with whether there's a right to assisted suicide, he said the test is the right deeply rooted in history and tradition and essential to a concept of ordered liberty? And he says if you look back at the founding and at the time of the 14th Amendment, most states made abortion a crime. Now, there are scholars who say he's wrong about that, but that's the basis on which he bases his decision. And so he says same-sex marriage, abortion flunks that test. But as others have pointed out, so does contraception, same-sex marriage, interracial marriage, the right to decide where your children are going to school, lots of other rights as well.
Both the president and the Department of Justice are pointing out one of the concurring opinions from Justice Brett Kavanaugh, which says that states cannot restrict travel for women who live in, let's say, Arkansas or one of these other states where trigger laws have either just gone into effect or will go into effect. So help us understand this, right? Give us the gut check here. This means then that women who live in states where abortion will now be outlawed can travel to states if they have the means, the money, and the ability to do so where abortion is legal to obtain the procedure. Yes, there's no restrictions on that.
So let's explain why we say that that is the case. This was a 5-4 ruling on whether to uphold Roe, 6-3 on whether to uphold the Mississippi law, which is how this got started in the first place. Because it was 5-4, if Kavanaugh didn't join it, it would only be 4. That wouldn't be a majority. So his concurrence is controlling. And that's why he says, in his opinion, states should not be able to ban people to travel from other states. But it has, I think, the force of law because he is the controlling concurrence. So I think you could easily read this decision to say that states can't make it a crime for someone in a banned state to travel to a state where abortion is legal in order to obtain the abortion. Now, there are other questions. Can medical professionals help them do that? Can they give them that advice? I'm not sure about that, and it'll depend a lot on these trigger laws.
We talked about Justice Alito's opinion. I want to read from the dissent written by Justice Breyer, signed by the 3 liberals on the court, saying that, quote, after today, young women will come of age with fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers had. And I find that significant, Pete, because I think it speaks to the arc and the scope of this moment and how generational it is, right? A right that has been in place for nearly 50 years. You have covered the court a long time. You are not at all prone to hyperbole, which I appreciate, Pete. So help us understand the significance of this moment.
Well, what you have here is now the Supreme Court supermajority has the votes to do what many of the members of the court have wanted to do for a long time. Certainly, Alito and Thomas have wanted the court to strike down Roe for years and years, but they've never had enough votes to do it. Now, with the 3 choices by President Trump, the 3 nominees from Trump, they do now have the votes. It was a 5-4 decision on that. Chief Justice Roberts didn't join them. So that's really what's changed here. I think you can't underestimate the force of President Trump's nominees. And remember that while, they would tell you that they've made this decision based on their view of the facts and the law, remember that President Trump said he would put justices on the court who would, quote, be pro-life. And so it would appear that his prediction came true.
Pete Williams, thank you. You've done yeoman's work today. I appreciate it. We look forward to seeing more of you on Nightly News. I want to go to Julia Ainsley, who is outside of the court. And Julia, at the top of the show, we saw some of the action there. Give us a sense of what you're hearing from protesters today.
Well, the crowd has just grown thicker and thicker every hour I've been out here, Hallie. You hear people behind me right now on bullhorns calling for people to stay, calling for action, calling for Congress to take action to codify Roe so that even with this opinion today, that the federal government could have a say in restricting states from banning abortions. Now, I've talked to people on both sides of this issue. You want to see how divided our country is, especially on this issue? Look no further than where I'm standing right now. I spoke to one woman who is Jewish and reminded me that in the Jewish faith, they say that life begins at the first breath. And she had a pretty bold way to show how she felt about the opinion today. Let's take a look at what she had to say and how she showed her feelings.
Because everyone is talking about murder and it's me. It's not somebody else yet. I have a child. This is a person with will. This is a person who has decision-making power, and this is me.
So, Hallie, you can see there she's walking through with a 9-month pregnant belly. She said she's actually due tomorrow and was already in the early stages of labor. She was there with her 1.5-year-old, and she said, now, this is a child. This is a human who has a right to life. But she said that she did not think it was murder because she wrote on her pregnant belly, not yet a human. A very stark way to show how she feels about this. And, of course, she did expect some people in this crowd to be upset with what she chose to say on her very pregnant belly.
An incredibly active scene behind you there at the court. Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for that. When you talk about where does this fight go from here, right, that is the key question. I've talked with activists and advocates on both sides of this issue, and unanimously the fight goes to the states. They say it goes to Congress, right? Two of those sort of branches or areas. You just saw a live shot of Hallie Vitale, who is on Capitol Hill. So spoiler alert, yes, we're going to talk about the Congress piece of this, Hallie, because that is where, in many ways, people are looking to for guidance. Because we'll get to the White House. We'll talk about President Biden. There's only so much that he can do unilaterally, right? You need the force of the legislative branch in many ways, or the force of state houses on the local level. We've seen the direction that is headed. I want to start here by playing a little bit. I had a chance to talk to two members of Congress who have both spoken in personal terms, very personal terms, about what abortion access means to them. Representative Congresswoman Jackie Speer, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. I want to play a little bit of our conversation. How much do you believe this Supreme Court, as it is currently made up, could roll back where we are?
I think it's a very real threat.
That's right. This is not a drill. This sets a dangerous precedent that would allow the court to undermine other fundamental human rights. There's no low that these people won't go.
Help us with the reality check, Hallie, of what Democrats realistically can do with the current makeup of Congress as it stands today.
Not much. And I think that's the wall that Democratic lawmakers that I've been talking to have been running up against over the course of the last few weeks. There was the moment where they saw that leaked draft opinion of what ultimately ended up happening today officially. And over the last few weeks, they have been brainstorming what they can do at the federal level. But honestly, short of legislation, and they tried that route and it failed in the Senate, they are not able to really do anything that shores up or codifies abortion access in the way that Democrats believe is necessary now that Roe is officially no longer the law of the land. It's why we've seen senators ask the White House to do things like executive orders around the abortion pill, around ensuring that women can travel between states and have the resources to do that. One group of senators even suggested at one point putting a point person at Health and Human Services to sort of head up a reproductive rights piece of that agency. These are things the Biden administration hasn't done. They are things that they say they are open to or thinking about, but they've been pretty non-committal about this, and it leaves lawmakers with a lot of anger, but not a lot that they can actually do.
You look at one of the things that I've heard a lot about is the question gets asked, right? How is this going to mobilize voters? Hallie, we'll talk in a little bit with Chuck and some others about the repercussions of what happened now 6 years ago in 2016 and that campaign and that election and the way that that has set us up for this moment now. I was on the campaign trail then, as you know, as you were too, and I covered all the Republican candidates, and I would go into these rooms in Iowa and in South Carolina, small events, not big Donald Trump rallies, right? This is stuff with like Carly Fiorina and Ben Carson and Ted Cruz, and people would talk about how important the Supreme Court was to them. It was anecdotally a mobilizing issue for many people that I talked with, right? You look at the numbers now, okay? You flash forward to 2022. Before the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion came out in May, very few people thought abortion was the biggest issue facing this country, just 3%. That number more than tripled in May when we went back and asked that same question to 10% of people. You look at that line, you look at the trajectory of that line, Hallie, and I wonder what that says to lawmakers, particularly on the Democratic side, who are hoping that this does mobilize voters ahead of the midterms.
What that line says to me is at the beginning, you have 49 years of precedent where women and voters have not had to think about this issue as something that was a tangible threat to them. And as you see it go up, it's the general cognizance of the country realizing that now this right that they had for nearly 5 decades is actually no longer there. And that's what Democrats are banking on. The people who I'm talking to, both on the advocacy side, on the campaign side, here in Congress, they're banking on the fact that as people become aware that they have lost something, that a right was taken away from them, that they will then be energized to vote. Because I think the key issue, when I look at polling, I like to look at enthusiasm. I think that that gauge is one of the most important things. Republicans were winning on enthusiasm. Now we see Democrats having many things, but this key issue to be energized around. And that's what Democrats are really hoping for. Because as much as people in Congress are saying, hey, we got to look to the states on what's next on this, you got to look to the states so that those states then can elect people to this body and they won't run up against these margins that they have right now, a 50-50 Senate where they cannot get anything done, just Democrats alone, a very tight margin for Nancy Pelosi running the House. That's Democrats' hope here. We know what history tells us typically about midterms for a first-term president and how the shellacking tends to go there, but they are trying to use this to turn that tide.
There's also some discussion now from some Democratic senators, including one that I spoke with, about whether Justices Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett misled them during their confirmation hearings because they testified about Roe versus Wade being precedent. That's a line to watch, I think, as this unfolds, too. Hallie Vitale, thank you for being with us and for being so on top of your beat. Appreciate it. On the White House beat, you've got President Biden today, emotional. He was angry, right? He was passionate about this, calling the Supreme Court decision a very solemn moment. Watch.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Vice President Kamala Harris was also in Illinois speaking about this very intensely, saying this is not over.
You have the power to elect leaders who will defend and protect your rights. And as the president said earlier today, with your vote, you can act, and you have the final word.
But the administration seems to recognize that the president's power to protect access to abortion via executive action, right, the unilateral thing that the president can do on his own, it's pretty limited. That's why he's looking at Congress, right? He's looking at the building that Hallie Vitale was just in to say, hey, restore those protections of Roe as a federal law. And then you heard the vice president say, yeah, voters, you've got to put more lawmakers, the Democrats say, into that building that you see on your screen so that they can help put in place federal protections of Roe into law. The President Biden is laying out some of what his own administration and federal agencies can do to try to help a woman get access in some ways, like defending women who now have to travel to another state for care and protecting access to contraception and abortion pills. Joining me now is Josh Letterman. Josh, this issue of abortion medication is particularly interesting, right? Because this is an area where the Biden administration can work through federal agencies to help maintain access to some abortion services, no?
That's exactly right, and that is exactly what the White House says that they are doing today. President Biden saying that he is directing the Health and Human Services Department to figure out whatever they can do to maximize access to abortion medications for people to be able to use that as an option if getting a surgical abortion is no longer a possibility, including, according to the White House, access to telehealth and to prescriptions by mail. So that is one pillar of what the White House is doing in response to the ruling today. The other major pillar has to do with travel, particularly for women who are going from one state where it's no longer legal to another state. President Biden saying the Justice Department is going to fight any state or local officials who try to interfere in someone's ability to go to another state, which is not something that today's decision precludes. But the reality is that's about all that this White House can do, Hallie. President Biden openly acknowledging today that it's not like he can whip out an executive order and with the stroke of a pen restore a right that the Supreme Court today said doesn't exist.
We're also hearing from former President Trump today, Josh, who says this decision was only made possible because he says he delivered everything as promised, including nominating and getting 3 highly respected and strong constitutionalists confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That is something that President Biden went after in his speech. He went after the 3 justices that Donald Trump appointed. Justices, we've talked about it, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, talking about why 2016 is so important as part of his pitch to get people out to vote in the next election. It feels like this is another flashpoint, Josh, as we look ahead not just to the midterms, but potentially to 2024.
It is, and it was so interesting to see the president in the cross hall of the White House, this kind of very stately atmosphere, bringing up former President Trump, someone he doesn't like to talk about very much, talking in explicitly political terms about voters need to go elect politicians who will do X, Y, and Z, given that really the only way forward on this for people who support abortion rights is to try to get some type of codification through federal law. But the reality is, even if this were to seriously play in Democrats' favor and you have this enormous enthusiasm and Democrats end up doing much better in the midterms than a lot of people predict that they will based on historical trends, nobody's talking about the possibility of Democrats emerging with a Senate, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate or anything close to that. The numbers that Democrats at this point would have to accumulate to be able to pass what they're talking about today into law is far more than they're likely to be able to get realistically in the short term. And that's one reason that this political message is very difficult for the president to make to supporters. It's very hard to promise them that there will be action on this in the short term, even as Democrats try to use this for maximum advantage to draw contacts with Republicans in the midterms.
Josh Letterman, live outside the White House. Josh, thank you. Appreciate it. I want to bring in now our political director and host of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, who is joining us now. Chuck, there's a lot to get to, and let me stay on this thread because you and I were on the air with Lester Holt during the special report when this first broke. And you made a point that I think is really worth repeating here, which was, as we talk about Donald Trump and as Josh has laid out that backdrop here, that it was 3 Trump-appointed justices that led to this decision. You said something like we might be looking back on the 2016 presidential election as the most consequential of not just our lifetime, but of our grandparents' lifetimes and their grandparents' lifetimes.
Yeah, no, I think you could make an argument, and look, I'm not going to sit here and debate which is 1, 2, or 3, but you could make an argument that 2016 and the long tail of it and all of the fallout that has happened from it, and it's sort of like a bunch of threads sort of pulled on the fabric of the democracy, the fabric of our society. Really, not since the 1876 election could I go back and say we had a presidential election that the fallout from it had such far-reaching consequences for decades. And that one took nearly 100 years to recover from that one. When you think about that one got us Jim Crow laws and all of that. So, look, this long tail, it is not, we use the phrase a lot, elections have consequences. Some elections have more consequences than others. And it's pretty clear the 2016 election is one that had enormous consequences. Look, 3 Supreme Court justices in one term is something that's just shocking that it happened. Yeah. But it's also, of course, how it happened, which is why, my greater fear here, Hallie, is that we've already had a former president essentially stoke fear in the legal system, right? Attack the Justice Department, attack institutions. And now you have a Supreme Court where I think many progressives, many Democrats feel as it was a rigged court, right? That 2 of the nominees shouldn't have really been nominated when they were and how it was done. my point is this, Hallie, doesn't matter how we get there. We could have a majority of this country has questions about our rule of law for different reasons, and that is not how a constitutional republic stays healthy.
Pull on that thread a little, Chuck, and I'm going to bring it back to the Supreme Court, because what you heard, and I know you saw what Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said today, questioning is exactly to your point here, the makeup of the court, the justices on the court. There's this Gallup tracking poll showing that Americans they're at an all-time low as far as confidence in the court, right? At 25%. I mean, that's really a stark low. That is a stark number, Chuck. How, like, I ask you this, and I know that you can't really answer it, but, like, for the sake of this discussion, how does this change, right? Like, when you take what we saw in the January 6 hearings, for example, when you look at the way when you take it holistically where we are at this moment in the country, how does it change?
Honestly, I think it would take an outside threat to the entire country to get us to sort of figure out how to overlook some of our divisions. I think we're at a really low point. We're questioning institutions. Let me just put that 25% in perspective. We used to say when Congress was that low, it's even lower now, confidence in approval of that institution. But that was a given, and what has happened, the Supreme Court now is being looked at the way we look at Congress, and that is the real fear here, is that all the black robes are no longer black, they're red and blue. In the eyes of everybody these days, and right now it appears very bright red among the red robes in that Supreme Court. But look, I just think it's that. You ask what I mean. I know this is going to sound silly. Aliens attacking. I mean, the point is that I think that we are our own worst enemy right now, and I don't know when it ends. We're years from getting to a place for this. I mean, look, I do think that if you were to attack our problem is that we do have extremes deciding mainstream decisions. And I think the way we've chosen nominees and the way we've elected our politicians favor those on the far ends of the political spectrum, particularly more so on the right these days than ever before. I think we have to think about how we nominate people, top 4, things like this, what we're seeing in Alaska. That's would be one place to sort of, if people that sit between the 30-yard lines, Hallie, if you will, right, of sort of feel as if they're in the large middle, they're not represented by today's elected officials, and certainly not by the Supreme Court. So I think you got to tackle it at that source of sort of how we nominate our candidates. Which is, I mean, systemic, Chuck, right? I mean, you're talking about foundational types of change. Yeah. Yes, this is systemic, and that's my point. We've pulled some threads. We had some uncomfortable stability here, and Donald Trump came in and one way or another essentially was a political wrecking ball, both directly and indirectly. And here we are.
Chuck Todd, thank you for being with us. Thanks for staying. I appreciate it. I know you're going to have a big show coming up on Sunday. I think folks are looking forward to that. Appreciate it. Coming up, Michigan has a nearly century-old law dating back to 1931 that bans most abortions in the state, but a temporary hold is stopping it from going into effect. We're live on the ground in Grand Rapids with more on that and what the governor of that state told me coming up in just a minute. We've talked about how in just the course of the last 7 hours or so, we've seen at least 6 states pull the so-called trigger on trigger bans as it relates to abortion after the Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe versus Wade. And one state on the brink here hasn't done it yet. It's Michigan. This issue is now front and center in November for them. And that's because of this really interesting history here. You are looking at a piece of a statute from 1931, way back in the old days, okay? And this old law says that Michigan cannot be allowed to have abortions. It would criminalize abortions, calls them a felony. There are no exceptions for rape or incest. There's only one exception to preserve the life of the mother. Now, right now, that law is not in effect because it's been temporarily blocked. It's been temporarily put on hold because of this lawsuit that the Planned Parenthood group in Michigan filed back in April that would stop the state from enforcing the law. Okay, a state judge ruled in favor of Planned Parenthood last month. So that means this 1931 law, the pause is pressed on that. It is on hold. I talked with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer today, who filed a motion just a few hours ago in the state's Supreme Court to basically keep that pause in place, to protect abortion access. And by the way, the political backdrop here, she's up for re-election in November. Here's what the governor told me. Do you believe that this could be a galvanizing moment for Democrats in November in these midterm elections?
Well, I got to tell you, 70% of the people of the state support a woman's right to make her own health care decision. The most important economic decision a woman will make over the course of her whole lifetime is whether and when to have a child. I do think you're going to see a whole new level of engagement. And I want every pro-choice person, whether you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican, to know you've got a space at my table. You need to join this fight.
I want to bring in now in Michigan, Dasha Burns. And Dasha, we talked about this injunction, this restrictive law that is temporarily blocked. How, you heard from Governor Whitmer there. She is trying what she thinks she can do at this moment, but it's not clear how long this injunction can stand.
That's right. That's exactly right. The timing here is unclear, and you've got this legal battle happening, and you mentioned it, the political battle. This is absolutely going to be key in November for both the governor and for state lawmakers that are running right now as well. Look, it's so critical to look at states like Michigan right now, because you have red states where they have those trigger laws. You've got blue states where governors have worked to shore up abortion rights. But then you have purple states like Michigan, where you have a Democratic governor fighting to protect abortion rights and a Republican state legislature that is looking to roll back abortion rights. And in fact, the governor has filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court asking to invalidate that 1931 law. We don't know when they're going to come out with a ruling on that, but the governor did today ask for the court to expedite that case. The Republican state legislature, though, has intervened in that Planned Parenthood case you're talking about to defend the 1931 law. And some lawmakers, Hallie, have even proposed a bill that would punish abortion providers with up to 10 years in prison. So you've got a major battle within Michigan's government right now. And meanwhile, you have a lot of voters today who are waking up in shock. And I've talked to Democrats, Independents, and Republicans about this today. A lot of people still really having a hard time wrapping their mind around having this right that has been in place for most of their lifetimes taken away here, Hallie.
Governor Whitmer, as we mentioned, is up for re-election. We all know Michigan is a key swing state, okay? It is fascinating when you look at it at the broader political landscape in this country, blue versus red. She has concerns about what happens to abortion access for women in her state if she loses her re-election campaign.
Yeah, I asked both Whitmer about this when we sat down earlier this week, and I asked the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, about this today during her press briefing as well. What are they going to do as they're trying to protect abortion rights, not just in this election cycle, but what happens in, even if Governor Whitmer does win in November, what happens 2, 3, 4 election cycles from now? What I heard from Nessel today is that they believe still that the best avenue is on the ballot. There's a proposed ballot initiative that would enshrine abortion rights in Michigan's constitution. That is something that abortion rights activists are trying to still get on the ballot in November. And they believe that this is better than with the courts, because what we saw today is that the Supreme Court, those rulings can be overturned, Hallie.
You've been talking to people there, Dasha. You've been trying to see how people are feeling today in the wake of that Supreme Court decision. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, there are just shockwaves through voters right now. Like I said, across the political spectrum, in Washington, when you look at the political conversation, it does seem black and white or red or blue, rather. But when I talk to women here across the political spectrum, there's a lot more nuance, a lot more gray area. And I want you to hear just a little bit of my conversations today.
How do they have the right to tell me or any woman what she can do with her body?
I'm concerned that we're starting to see the downfall of America at this point, and we're taking
strong words.
Taking rights away from people is a really big deal, and how do we get those rights back?
Hallie, obviously a day with deeply personal, deeply emotional processes for people to navigate what they've just heard. I also want to tell you, Pennsylvania, another state which is going to very much have abortion front and center as there is a critical Senate seat up for grabs and governorship there. And I just talked to a woman who voted for Trump twice, voted for Oz in the primary, and even she tells me that she thinks the government shouldn't have a say, no matter federal federal or state in personal medical decisions. So it's not as red or blue as some people may think from the conversations I've been having today, Hallie.
Dasha Burns, live for us in Grand Rapids. Dasha, thank you. Thank you for being on the ground for us. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, and it's big news also, the House passing a bipartisan bill designed to try to prevent gun violence. It has already passed the Senate, and that means it is now headed to President Biden's desk for his signature. The legislation would do things like incentivize states to pass red flag laws and expand background checks for younger gun buyers, ages 18 to 21. It is the most significant gun bill to come out of Congress in nearly 3 decades. Number 2, a UN panel has found Israeli security forces fired the bullets that killed a Palestinian American journalist last month. Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed while covering an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank. Israel has denied that any Israeli soldier, quote, targeted a journalist. Number 3, today marks 1 year since that Surfside condo collapse in Florida, that horrific collapse. Family members of the victims honored their loved ones at a remembrance today. You can see First Lady Jill Biden was there. 98 people were killed when that building fell. Number 4, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband has been charged with DUI after a crash in California last month. A county district attorney's office says Paul Pelosi had a blood alcohol content above the legal limit in the state. He could face up to 5 years of probation, 5 days in jail, even fines. Number 5, officials in Phoenix say a group of women hiking on a canyon trail had to be rescued, taken to a hospital because of heat. The 8 women were reportedly there for a religious reality TV series called Bad Girls Gone God. Fire officials say they went on their hike in the morning but didn't have enough, apparently, water or supplies. When we come back, one Colorado clinic says it's been seeing double the number of women coming from out of state looking for abortions, even before today's decision on Roe. Now they're expecting even more patients. That's our original coming up in just a minute. Mississippi's only abortion clinic, the clinic at the center of this Supreme Court decision today, it is still open even after the ruling. You are looking live at that clinic now. We had seen some protests earlier there where people were trying to keep folks from going into the clinic. It's going to stay open until Mississippi's trigger law goes into effect sometime in early July, even as people there worry about the future.
Today, across this country, half the population were stripped of their human rights. It's hard to say this, but that's just the beginning.
Mississippi's governor was traveling today with his daughter, but took time to praise today's decision in a quick video on Twitter.
I've never been prouder to be a Mississippian. Our elected officials were able to bring this case because of the conviction of our constituents. You see, Mississippi is a God-fearing place, and we fight this battle, a battle we've been fighting for almost 50 years, and we stand on the shoulders of so many who have come before us. But we fight this battle because we believe in our hearts that it's God's will to do so.
Kathy Park is in Jackson, Mississippi for us. She's joining us now. Kathy, this is the clinic, right, that challenged the Mississippi abortion ban that said you can't have abortions after roughly 15 weeks. I thought it was interesting that at one point earlier this afternoon, you said it's not like there were a ton of demonstrators. It's not like there were a ton of protesters outside that clinic today. Tell me what you're seeing now.
Hallie, yeah, I was actually going to start off with that point because despite what you're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now, this mobilization on both sides of this debate, we're right in front of the Capitol here in Mississippi, and it's been relatively quiet all day. And just a few miles away from where we are standing is that last standing abortion clinic here in the state of Mississippi, and it's been relatively calm. Earlier today, shortly after that decision came out, yes, there were a handful of protesters, but I think there's now more media than anything else. But you know what? This is a very restrictive state. We're here in the Bible Belt, and a lot of people that we spoke with on the ground tell me, look, after that leak in May, they kind of didn't, they actually said that this decision was not a surprise to them. They were kind of anticipating this because the state is so conservative. There are so many abortion restrictions already in place. Obviously, this has been a divisive issue all across the board. We had a chance to speak with the owner of the clinic, and she said this is very disappointing. It's a reversal of women's rights. However, their work will continue. In fact, they're actually planning to open up another clinic in the state of New Mexico, and they're kind of working on that. But ever since this leak, Back in May, they've been mobilizing other resources, getting other organizations involved, raising funds to help women who want to still gain access to abortion safely and legally beyond the state of Mississippi after that 10-day window, Hallie.
That was my question to you, Kathy, is what they plan to do next. Kathy Park, live for us in Jackson. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on, which, because of this Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe, centers on that news, specifically on late-term abortions. A doctor who runs a clinic in Colorado, which offers those types of procedures, says he expects to see a lot more new patients with today's ruling. Our own Isa Gutierrez was recently at that clinic and also talked with a former patient who turned to the practice when she needed to have a late-term abortion herself.
This layer here is bulletproof, okay?
Nearly half a century ago, Dr. Warren Hearn worked at Colorado's very first abortion clinic. A controversial practice then and now, with the Supreme Court overturning their landmark 1973 decision, Roe v. Wade.
All the windows around here are bulletproof.
2 years later, he founded this place, the Boulder Abortion Clinic, in 1975.
We specialize in taking care of women who have very high-risk situations that can't be seen in other clinics.
He's one of a handful of doctors in the U.S. who perform late-term abortions. Colorado, one of only a few states that does not restrict them. According to CDC data, abortions at or after 21 weeks represent less than 1% of all abortions in the U.S. In 2019, they say more than 4,800 were performed. Last year, a jump in abortion restrictions enacted in 19 states, with conservative legislators arguing life begins at conception. These days, Dr. Hearn says abortion bans like the ones in Texas and Oklahoma restricting abortion after cardiac activity at 6 weeks are making his practice exceptionally busy.
The number of patients we've seen has basically doubled since a year ago. We can't possibly see all the women who want to come here for help. And I need to expand my service.
He says the Supreme Court's decision will push more women to have late-term abortions.
That increases the cost, it increases the complexity, it makes it more difficult, it takes more time, it's more emotional anguish.
Erica Christensen, a former patient of Dr. Hearn, was in her 3rd trimester when she says her doctor explained her baby wasn't swallowing.
There was a genetic muscular condition that would not be conducive to living outside my body.
She says they decided to terminate the pregnancy.
That's when we learned that we couldn't in our state because we had crossed an imaginary line that we didn't even know existed until that point. We were sort of shocked by that because we were living in New York.
It was 2016, and at the time, state law banned abortions after 24 weeks. She was referred to Dr. Hearn's clinic in Colorado.
It took 2 weeks for us, under the best possible circumstances, to figure out my course of care.
Ultimately, she says she was lucky.
It's poor people, it's young people, it is disabled people, medically complex people like myself, it is people of color. These are the people who are going to be most impacted by these bans. Most people are just not as lucky as I was.
Less than a year after visiting Dr. Hearn, Erica gave birth to a daughter.
My 5-year-old little girl literally would not be here had I not been able to have my abortion. She's everything to us, like she's our whole lives.
Do you think about these laws changing and how they'll impact her potentially one day?
Every day. I think about what life is going to be like for my 5-year-old little girl every day. I hope that by the time she's even thinking about becoming pregnant, I hope things are better. But certainly, I mean, it's really scary times. Like, I'm absolutely terrified for her.
Do you already have plans for the new building?
I'm working on it, yeah. I'm sketching out plans. I'm working with the architects. I want us to be able to see more patients.
Dr. Hearn is turning 84 this month. You're not going to retire?
No, I don't have time for that. I'm bringing other young physicians to help me, and they're very dedicated and very skilled.
Isa Gutierrez is joining us now. Isa, it is such timely reporting, particularly with what we're seeing in Washington today. What stood out most to you as you were talking with people for and against late-term abortions, talking with patients, clinic staff, et cetera?
Sure. Well, Hallie, when we talk about late-term abortions, again, these are patients who are high risk, patients who late in their pregnancies found out from their doctors that they were experiencing medical complications that could put their life or their baby's life at risk. So, Hallie, they are not happy to be in this situation. They're also exhausted, and they're angry that they had to go to these lengths to leave their state, to find the means to leave their states, to come to a place like Dr. Hearn's clinic to get the safe care that they needed. Hallie?
The doctor you interviewed was showing you the security setup that they have there. I was interested in that because abortion has always been, obviously, it's incredibly controversial. It is deeply personal for so many people in this country. Are they anticipating the potential for needing to shore up, for example, that security apparatus, Issa?
Yeah, well, Hallie, Dr. Hearn and the staff explained to me that this has been building for them really since they opened in the last 50 years, right? Those bulletproof windows have been installed now for years. They've increased the number of cameras that they have. Dr. Hearn tells me he no longer goes out his front door. They're, of course, concerned today more than ever about their patients and about their staff. It makes it harder for them to hire staff because working there is so controversial. But I spoke to Dr. Hearn just a little bit ago on the phone, and he told me that who he's most scared for are the patients who will not make it to his clinic. He's confident that they will be able to protect the patients who get there, but those who don't make it to him on time, those are the patients that he is most concerned about right now.
Issa Gutierrez, thank you so much for bringing us that story. Appreciate it. Coming up, the economic costs of ending abortion access. We're getting into those numbers and what some big companies are doing about it next. So we've talked about the personal and the political impact of this decision by the Supreme Court today to overturn the landmark abortion rights ruling Roe versus Wade. But there is an economic impact, too. The American Journal of Public Health says research shows some women who were denied abortions and then gave birth had a better chance of being in poverty just 6 months later. And according to the Guttmacher Institute, an abortion rights advocacy group, the 24 states that plan to ban abortions are more likely to have a combination of higher imprisonment rates, lower wages, fewer worker rights, and less access to quality health care. I want to bring in our Jake Ward now. And there's a lot of different directions we could go in talking about the financial impact of restricting abortion access. Talk about some of the research that shows what this ruling would do as it relates to education for women, employment, and how much money they could end up earning.
Well, Hallie, if the decision that we're handed down today were based not on this question of state rights versus federal authority, it would draw on evidence like the evidence that's been collected here in Northern California, a center of public health research. At UCSF, the University of California in San Francisco, a research group led by Diana Green Foster did an enormous, unique study in the United States that looked at the effect on more than 1,000 women of either being able to get the abortion they sought or being denied the abortion they sought, and they found enormous repercussions for those women in almost every measure of their lives. In fact, Diana Green Foster told me that when you looked at the results, you could see that the women who'd been denied an abortion were in effect predicting the outcome in terms of the concerns they had for themselves. Here's how she described those findings.
We find that women who are denied abortions are more likely to be poor. People say it's not the right time, and we find that they're unable to achieve other life aspirations when they're denied an abortion. They say, I want to take care of the children I already have, and we see that the existing children do worse when their mom is denied an abortion.
By, again, every conceivable measure of well-being, Hallie, we're looking at women who are denied abortions in their place of residence or place of work. They are absolutely wind up with worse outcomes in life in category after category, Hallie.
There is the business impact here, too, Jake. You are obviously a part of our business and technology team here covering this. When you talk about the economy, you look at what companies are doing. You've got Dick's Sporting Goods, for example. Dick's stock soared after the company said that they would pay up to $4,000 for people who need to travel for legal abortions. We have seen this now unfold at company after company. Talk us through this and what that means.
Well, not only are companies, as of today, issuing statement after statement saying that they will pay for out-of-pocket travel expenses for any employees who need to travel out of state for abortion services. Meta, for instance, issued a statement to that effect earlier. You mentioned Dick's Sporting Goods. But also, if you look at it, you find that it is, in fact, a big part of being able to recruit women into a company. More than 50% of CFOs, chief financial officers, surveyed by CNBC said that it would have a big impact on whether they chose to relocate somewhere based on what the laws would be in that state. And you also have to look at the broader economic impact. The research shows that women who do not have access to abortion or are subject to state regulations that restrict their access wind up unable to take higher paying jobs. They don't have the flexibility in their lives. So we're going to see the ripple effects of this go on and on in the states that choose to restrict abortion choice. Hallie?
Jake Ward, live for us in San Francisco. Jake, thank you. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, a deadly standoff in Texas. Police say it started, look at the fire, when deputies went to somebody's home, this man's home, to arrest him on a warrant. They say the man started firing at them and that he allegedly put explosives on his front porch. That is what caused the fire, the thick smoke you see there. Officials think the man was killed, but they did not find a body. Also from our Southeast Bureau, check this out, a humongo snake found in Florida. In the Everglades, a team of biologists found it, a Burmese python. Officials say it's the heaviest one ever captured in Florida. It weighed 215 pounds, was almost 18 feet long. And from our West Coast Bureau, an update on that shark attack story in California we told you about yesterday. The victim sharing more about what happened, saying getting bitten by a shark was not lucky, but that everything else about that day sure was lucky. He said the water was calm, there were no waves, so people nearby could hear him yelling for help. Good news is he's expected to make a full recovery. Still to come today, the House passed the biggest legislation to prevent gun violence in decades. It now goes to President Biden's desk. We'll take you live to the Hill. Plus, how other countries are reacting to the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade. We'll be right back. In a key moment today on Capitol Hill. And honestly, frankly, what would have otherwise, if the Supreme Court hadn't happened, be the biggest story of the day? The new gun bill, the most significant federal gun legislation in decades, is now just one signature away from becoming law. That's because today, you see it on your screen, the House of Representatives passed that bill that already passed the Senate with bipartisan support. You had 14 House Republicans voting yes with all House Democrats. Remember, 15 Republicans supported this in the Senate. So now this bill is on its way, figuratively, to President Biden's desk. He's expected to sign it fast. I want to bring in now Julie Sirkin. And Julie, you know, this is a huge day, I think, in Washington, mostly for what we saw from the Supreme Court and this generational change to Roe versus Wade, the abortion decision that has been overturned that we have been talking about now for the last 60 minutes. If that hadn't happened, we'd probably, for this hour, have been talking about what you are covering today, Julie, which is this significant piece of legislation related to gun reform in this country. 15 Republican senators voting yes, and a handful of Republicans in the House voting yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. When I went to sleep yesterday after covering the Senate vote on the gun legislation, I can't tell you the emotion that I felt in the chamber from gun control advocates, from shooting victims, and from senators themselves on both sides of the aisle. And today, one of my colleagues, Ali Rafa, spoke to Madeline Dean, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, who said that she came to the Capitol today ready to vote on this historic legislation and got the notification on her phone that this ruling came down from the Supreme Court. Pennsylvania, of course, one of the states in the country poised to restrict abortions more than other states, perhaps, really riding on the November election, something we've heard Democrats say over and over again today. But that gun vote, man, it's so historic, passing the House today, and it just can't be overshadowed, even though the decision by Roe, of course, derailed some of that excitement with Democrats.
So talk about what happens next. They've already sent it to the president's desk, right? And I say figuratively because it's not like there's some, you know, assembly line of people passing papers over to the president. I mean, there is something physical that goes to President Biden, who's getting ready to head on an overseas trip, but we expect him to sign it fast.
Well, we don't know, Hallie, because, well, while Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, with a stroke of the pen, sent that legislation over to the White House, President Biden could go on his trip and come back next week and sign it then. But the bottom line here is this isn't everything he wanted. It's not everything Democratic leaders wanted. They'll be the first to say that. It doesn't raise the minimum age to 21. It doesn't ban automatic weapons, and it doesn't enlist all universal background checks either. But it does a lot of things that Democrats have been pushing for over the last 3 3 decades. And with this compromise, this is something that gun control advocates and shooting survivors could be proud of. As one woman told me last night, she said she thought she'd be fighting for this for decades to come. She was a survivor of a mass shooting herself in 2018, and she was just speechless. She never thought that this would happen.
Julie Sirkin live on the Hill for us. Julie, thank you. As we talked about, the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade could have an impact for people who are looking for abortions in Florida. The Republican-led state there has a ban on abortions after 15 weeks that would go into effect later this week. I think July 1st, next week, I should say, end of next week. But that's being challenged. And right now, the state has one of the nation's highest rates of abortion in the country. Zincle Asamoah is with demonstrators in St. Petersburg in Florida for us. And as you walk with these protesters, Zincle, and I'm glad to see you out there, Florida's an interesting place because it typically has been a place where people, let's say from Georgia or Alabama, have come seeking abortion access.
Hallie, that's 100% right. In some ways, people actually view Florida as a safe haven. Is that because they don't have restrictive abortion rights? No. But when you compare it to Georgia, to Louisiana, they have more access. And so people are really concerned. We're here, we're marching, cars are honking, people are saying, my body, my choice. But it's also the tale of two Americas. I was here earlier today, and there was a smaller protest in favor of this SCOTUS ruling. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
It's painful today. It really hurts. I can't believe our country has gone backwards.
The issue with abortion has always been very simple for pro-lifers, and that is one sentence. It's not just your body, there's another person involved. And so that person is a...
So, Hallie, a lot of different perspectives, but at the end of the day, a lot of heated emotion. And the thread here, whether people are for or against abortion, was shock. Even though they had seen that draft opinion, both sides were very surprised to see the SCOTUS decision today, Hallie.
Tell me more about what you're hearing from people there, because this does, as you talk about, has some specific impacts on not just Floridians, but those who have come into the state to try to seek access to abortion.
Yeah, Hallie, it has wide-reaching impact. So Republican Governor Ron DeSantis did pass a 15-week abortion ban bill. That goes into effect July 1st. It has been contended right here in Florida. But now, a lot of the people who are marching right now are concerned that that will go into law without much contest because of this SCOTUS ruling. And so, overall, the sentiment is concern, but also tension. We witnessed a clash between pro-abortion and anti-abortion advocates. Let's take a listen at how that went.
Our choice. Our bodies, 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 our choice.
So, Hallie, tensions are high, online, offline. Folks are marching, and this is the first of what will be many protests today. But the other thread, whether people were for abortion or against today, was that the fight continues. The fight continues for both sides of this issue. So this is something we're going to have to watch. Hallie?
Zincle Asamoah, right in the thick of it there in St. Petersburg. Zincle, thank you. I want to bring in Yamiche Alcindor, our NBC News Washington correspondent, moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Okay, so Yamiche, we've been doing this since 10 o'clock this morning, you and I, since the Supreme Court decision came down, because it's been a day of a lot of fast-moving developments, right? Not just the decision, but what we saw in some of those states that have trigger laws, what we're looking at live right now in New York City. I believe this is Washington Square Park. Don't quote me on that. We'll try to find out. As you are seeing people around the country mobilize and activate, and Yamiche, on both sides of this, right? Because you have abortion rights advocates who are, I think, demoralized is fair to say, devastated is fair to say. You have anti-abortion advocates who are celebrating, who are now saying, like what we heard from former Vice President Mike Pence, that the fight now is to try to get every state to have similar restrictions on abortion access.
Certainly. And what you see from conservatives really is a celebration, because this is a culmination of conservatism and activism. They've been pushing for this for generations, to have Roe v. Wade be overturned. And Democrats, frankly, now they are trying to strategize how they are going to respond to this. President Biden, as well as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they both said that reproductive rights are on the ballot in November, making a pitch to voters that Democrats need to keep and then grow their majorities in the House and the Senate. We also hear already from some senators that there's going to be a hearing hearing in the Senate Help Committee. That's a committee that focuses on health, education, and labor. They're going to be talking about what the impact of this decision will be. But we should note that those senators, including Senator Patty Murray, she wrote a letter among 20 senators who wrote a letter to President Biden asking for executive action to protect abortion rights in this country. But the White House has not really come up with a strategy of how to really impact abortion rights and maybe even make it easier for a woman to get an abortion in this country because of what the Supreme Court has done. And of course, this issue is now so much in the states' hands. And as we've been noting all day, more than half of the states in this country are likely to or will ban abortion immediately. And we're already seeing women turned away from clinics. So this is a direct impact. And politics and politicians are trying to catch up with women who are now having to find other ways to get abortions.
We're taking a look now at some of these aerial pictures from New York City. It was Washington Square Park we were looking at just a moment ago, but you can see, I think, the scale and the scope of some of these demonstrations that we're seeing. It's not just here in Washington, Yamiche, where we are outside the Supreme Court. It's also in cities around the country. And the issue has come up, and I know that when you've talked with folks about this issue, one of the things you hear about is how this will disproportionately affect those in marginalized communities, lower income women, women of color, people who would potentially need to travel hundreds of miles to obtain access to abortion. If they have the money to do so, they can get the time off work to do so, they have the ability to do so, and they have the support to do so. That's a lot of caveats.
Well, it's very clear that the people in this country who are accessing abortion are women who are low income, disproportionately women of color. 1 in 4 women in this country under the age of 45 have had an abortion. But when I talk to advocates, they tell me that it is really the women of color and women of low income who are going to be suffering the most. In some states across the South in particular, women are going to have to drive upwards of 18 hours if they want to get an abortion. And I should also tell you, I've been interviewing abortion women who are running abortion clinics, and they tell me that once they get to those abortion clinics, let's say you go from Louisiana, you drive the distance to get to a place where you can get an abortion, sometimes the waiting list, Hallie, are 300 women. So it's not just sort of getting yourself to another state, it's also, can you afford the hotel? Can you afford to take off work to wait for that time? So this is really going to be expensive for a lot of women who simply cannot afford it. The other thing to note here is that there are already women, especially Shannon Brewer, who is the director of the Jackson Women's Health Organization. That, of course, is the clinic that was at the center of this Supreme Court decision. She told me last month that she was already ready to move to New Mexico because she thinks that women are going to need this and that she is very, very worried that this is going to be devastating, especially to her clients who, again, are very low income. So this is really, you're already seeing a lot of clinic directors making decisions to try to make immediate impact because they're really worried for the safety of women.
Yamiche Alcindor, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you very much for that analysis. I appreciate it. I want to leave some of those pictures up that we're seeing live from New York here as we bring in our next guest, Carol Lam, because you had Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas really raising eyebrows in Democratic circles today as they looked at the impact beyond simply abortion access in this Supreme Court ruling. Carol is joining us now. And Carol, you have the justice saying that gay rights and contraceptions rulings should be considered now by this court, that other rights based on substantive due process need to be considered. Griswold, the right to birth control, to contraception. Lawrence, which threw out anti-sodomy laws. Obergefell, which, of course, legalized same-sex marriage. Now, Justice Alito came out. You see Justice Thomas's opinions here that we should reconsider all of this, right? You had Justice Alito in his decision saying, well, listen, and I'm paraphrasing here, the dissent will say that we're going to try to overturn other stuff. We're trying to be clear this is just about abortion. Help us understand this, right? Because what Justice Thomas has written has created, I think, some real ripple effects politically here in Washington and beyond.
Sure, Hallie. What Justice Thomas wrote was way out on the edge here because, as you said, Justice Alito took great pains to say this decision is limited to the abortion context. Now, you can question how much weight that actually carries because that was not a statement that is necessary to the outcome in this case. And when that happens, when a justice makes some comment that is not essential to the holding of the case, it doesn't have any binding precedential value. But the justice, for all it's worth, and he did write the majority opinion, he said this is limited to the abortion context. Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, which means that he agrees with the outcome in this case, but he has something else to say. And the something else he had to say was on the reasoning of this opinion, which he thinks is the right reasoning, absolutely. All of these other rights, what today stand as fundamental rights, should be revisited. And there's no question the way he would come out on those cases. Now, you can speculate about what happened here. Justice Alito's initial draft opinion came out, and you can speculate that Justice Thomas tried to get his view into the majority opinion. That did not happen, so he's left on his own writing this concurring opinion. But there is no question that he is inviting another look at these fundamental rights that you just laid out.
So this was my question, Carol, this invitation, right, not just to his fellow justices, but to conservative lawmakers and individual states too, no?
Absolutely. That is the way that this Dobbs abortion opinion ended up coming out in this case. It was very clear what the abortion law was in terms of constitutional protection for a woman to make a decision in at least the early stages of pregnancy. States passed laws that they knew were not consistent with the Supreme Court's holding in Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and they did it intentionally to get this case in front of the Supreme Court with a conservative majority. And today was the result of that. And that is what Justice Thomas, it's hard to see it any other way. That is what he is suggesting happen with these other fundamental rights.
Carol Lamb, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for that analysis.
Thank you.
Let's take a look now. It's not just the reverberations of the Supreme Court decision having an impact here in the United States. There is international reaction to this, too. And for that, I want to go to Megan Fitzgerald, who is live for us in London, with more on how other countries are looking at this ruling. Megan, what are we seeing from the international community? I know that the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is calling this a big step backwards. How is this being seen around the world?
Yeah, Hallie, I can tell you, those comments that you just mentioned from Prime Minister Johnson certainly being echoed throughout Europe and across the world. I mean, keep in mind, we're talking just within the last couple of years, 3 years really, that we've seen several nations that are predominantly Catholic, majority Christian nations voting to legalize abortion. We're talking about Ireland, along with Argentina and Mexico. So certainly, as you mentioned, across the stage here, we are seeing that this is viewed as a step backwards for the United States. And so these global leaders are sounding off. We're hearing from the Prime Minister of Belgium, along with Spain, saying that women should have the right to choose. The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, saying that it is a fundamental right for women to have an abortion and one that should be protected. The Prime Minister of Canada saying that this is a horrific decision and that his heart and prayers are with the women and girls in the United States. And then lastly, I want to mention the First Minister of Scotland saying that this is the darkest day for women in her lifetime, Hallie.
What about the example that the U.S. sets for other countries? Because that is something that we hear presidents, past and present, tout often, that the U.S. is an example to others in the world. When you talk to experts, right, some of them suggest that places that are looking to crack down on abortion could use the U.S. as an example in that way. What are the ripple effects here?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the concern, that there could potentially be this ripple effect. We're hearing from the leader of Amnesty International, the Secretary General, who is saying that there is a big concern that this is going to damage the global perception of the United States. And then even worse, this could potentially influence governments and anti-rights organizations to then further deny rights of women across the world. Because as you mentioned, the United States is seen as a role model for so many nations across the world. And so as the United States does, a lot of times we see that reverberated across the world. And so there is real concern that this could just be the start of rights for women being denied across the world, Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald, live for us in London. Megan, thank you for that. When we come back, we'll take you to Missouri, which has already banned abortion just today. Stay with us. With With today's decision by the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, the state of Missouri became the first in the country immediately after to effectively end abortion because of its trigger law that went into effect. You saw it almost right away. The state attorney general's office there announcing that he had signed the legal opinion implementing that abortion ban.
I am humbled to be a part of this and the first attorney general in the country to effectively end abortion. As a long champion for the rights of the unborn and Missouri families, I pledge to continue to fight for our most fundamental right, the right to life.
Democratic Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush stood outside the clinic where she says she got an abortion after she was raped, saying she cannot believe today's ruling.
It broke my heart because I'm thinking about the people who today found out that they were pregnant, who found out they were pregnant a few weeks ago, and we're trying to figure out what to do.
Cal Perry is in St. Louis. He is joining me now. Okay, Cal, so you are in the state that immediately, right, we talk about a trigger ban, immediately pulled the trigger on it. And you heard Eric Schmidt, the attorney general in the state, touting that in that video. Talk to me about what you've seen out there and where this goes.
Yeah, look, it was like a political race to do that. The Republican
Sure
governor,
was, yeah.
Republican attorney general, and a Republican state house. It needed to be codified. They had to actually sign a proclamation in order for that trigger law to take effect. And so it was the attorney general who did it first. Minutes later, the governor did it. So again, it was like the two were trying to beat each other. So immediately you have this ban. It's now illegal to provide anyone, a woman, with an abortion in this state. And that can carry 5 to 15 years in prison for the medical provider. That went into immediate effect. Here, this location of Planned Parenthood, as you said, this is the only location in the state where women could get an abortion before this morning. A number of women had appointments today, had appointments this weekend. They're going to have to go out of state from now. They're going to have to go to Illinois. It's the closest place they can go. Governor Pritzker of that state has said he is going to protect a woman's right to have this procedure. But here in Missouri, you know, Hallie, we talk about this a lot, right? Planned Parenthood has said this is about so much more. It's, of course, about abortion rights, but it's about more than that. It's about access to reproductive health care for women. And reproductive health care, they will tell you, is health care. And in a place like Missouri, these centers are vitally important because you have a large population here that is under the poverty level, that needs the protection of Title X, for example, to receive that health care. And Planned Parenthood and the groups here worry, including the protesters behind me, worry that the ruling today is going to have a massive chilling effect that reaches far beyond just abortion, Hallie.
When you talk to people, what do you hear, right? Because you're in St. Louis, which is, you know, one of the obviously urban centers. It leans more Democratic than the rest of the state.
Yeah, look, I think people here are shocked, even though they weren't surprised that it was coming. I know that sounds weird.
That's right.
That's sort of what Planned Parenthood said as well, right? They were expecting it, but they're totally speechless. Yeah, look, there's also a depression that has set in here in a place like Missouri where people feel helpless. They feel like the state is run by conservatives. They feel like that is not going to change, and they feel like conservatives are more aggressive than liberals are, than Democrats are. We're hearing that a lot here, right? The way that the Supreme Court shook out, the way that this ruling happened. People here are upset about it, but the people we've talked to, Hallie, feel like there's nothing they can really do about it. And when you look at this regionally, this is a regional story as well. You look at Kansas, for example. Well, in 2020, Kansas did about 3,000 abortions, and more than half of them were women from Missouri. So it was hard enough to get an abortion here in Missouri to begin with. Now it's impossible, and women here just, they don't know what it is they're going to do.
And I see behind you, Cal, yelling, honking, all of that. Has it been this active all day, or has it built as the day has gone on?
This is picking up because Representative Cori Bush, who you heard from there, is having an event in about 35 minutes. We're kind of just step back because there's a lot of media there, but they're getting ready for an event. And look, there's going to be something here this weekend, too. On Sunday, there's a Pride March in St. Louis, so you can expect security to be high, and you can expect these marches are going to kick up again because this is a trigger law state, Hallie.
You travel the country first, Cal. I mean, you've been all over the country, especially in some of these states out west and in the Midwest. Tell me, what do you think is the storyline that we haven't talked enough about as it relates to this decision today, based on, you know, your long experience covering politics and being in the heartland?
So I was telling this anecdote about being in Kentucky recently and watching women walked to an abortion clinic while getting harassed and harangued by crowds of people who were telling them they were doing something against God's will and being needed to be escorted into those centers. And we see this across the country. And I think today what we're seeing is a continuation of that. And look, this is where we are. Hallie, I know I'm telling you this, okay? So the irony is not lost on you. This is where we are politically in America. I mean, these midterms are going to be something. Biden today said that this is now on the ballot. Well, guess what's on the ballot 2 years from now? And people here and across the country, and this is something I'm hearing, and I know you're hearing it too, they're talking about Donald Trump. Right? Donald Trump got it done.
That's right.
When it comes to this issue, conservatives and the right to life movement here in Missouri, and the right to life movement is powerful in Missouri. They are influential in who wins in state politics. They say Donald Trump got it done.
Cal Perry, live for us in St. Louis. Cal, thank you. Look, today has been, it is not an overstatement to say it has been a seismic moment. It is. You said it at the very top of the show. This is a big deal day. For some, it is a devastating loss of health care, of human rights for women in this country. For others, it is the culmination of a decades-long fight to end what they see as the immoral taking of lives. Both sides in full display, in tears, both sides at the Supreme Court, the place where this decision originated. Hundreds of people gathering to protest the loss of their constitutional right to abortion, or on the other side of the issue, saying the opposite. Women talking about how they feel about the ruling, angry, scared, betrayed. We saw tears of disappointment, but we also saw tears of joy. People celebrating, cheering on this decision, some calling today the best day of their lives. Watch.
It feels like a betrayal. It feels like my country doesn't love me and appreciate my body as a woman. I can't even chant because I can't say anything.
I was crying tears of joy when I found out. This has been by far the best week of my life.
Legal abortion on demand!
What we need to do as women, organize, don't agonize, organize. We are the majority. 6 people do not dictate our lives based on their religion.
For the older generation of pro-lifers to see this today, I'm so grateful for them and their perseverance.
What are they going to come for next? Gay marriage. Will I be able to marry a woman in 4 years? The next election cycle is going to be brutal. Like, it's terrifying.
How do you think I felt, man? This is amazing.
I've had people in my family have abortions, and they have felt the regret years and years down the line, and they're still dealing and facing with the trauma today. And if Roe v. Wade wouldn't have been legal inside of the United States, I would have family members that I don't have today.
Legal abortion on demand! These people don't care about that. Those people over there don't care about that. They're not pro-life. They're pro-birth, pro-hypocrisy, and pro-controlling and subjugating women to their demands.
It has been a big day, a busy one, and I appreciate you joining us today on NBC News Now. Top story picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.